The first encounters. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the Matthews' modest but warm suburban home, its light stretching across the polished wooden floors and highlighting the little details that Sarah Matthews had worked so hard to make perfect. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and the rhythmic sound of the kettle hummed softly in the background, mingling with the faint clatter of cutlery. Sarah, a woman in her early 30s with auburn hair tied neatly back in a ponytail, moved gracefully between the counter and the stove. She was a woman of purpose, someone who had dedicated her life not just to her family but also to her community. Her heart was large, and it showed in every choice she made. She hummed a quiet tune as she scrambled eggs, sliding them onto a plate next to golden toast. Her husband, Daniel, sat at the table in full police uniform, the badge on his chest catching the light. He had kind eyes, warm and steady, and a calm strength that reassured everyone he met. Daniel lifted his coffee cup and gave Sarah a small smile as she placed the plate in front of him. "Another day of keeping Oakwood safe," he said, his voice a mixture of pride and quiet responsibility. Sarah leaned against the counter, wiping her hands on a towel. "And another day of me running around for the shelter. We've got the food drive today. Boxes stacked higher than me. You know how it is." Daniel chuckled, his salt and pepper hair glinting in the morning light. "That's my Sarah, always giving, always helping. This town doesn't know how lucky it is to have you." She rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. "Oh, stop it. I just do what anyone should do." But deep down she felt the warmth of his words. Daniel finished his breakfast, kissed Sarah on the cheek, and grabbed his patrol cap. "I'll be home for dinner. Stay safe, okay?" "You too, Officer Matthews," she teased, giving him a wink as he headed for the door. When the house grew quiet again, Sarah tidied up and prepared for her errands. She was used to busy mornings, but that day felt different. As she drove to the grocery store, she had no idea that her life was about to intersect with a mystery that would shake the foundation of her world. The store was bustling with the usual mid-morning crowd. Mothers with toddlers, retirees with slow carts, and young workers grabbing quick lunches. Sarah moved through the aisles, methodically ticking items off her list. As she reached for a can of beans, she felt a prickling sensation, the kind that crawls across the back of the neck when someone is watching. She paused, glanced around casually, but saw nothing unusual. A mother argued with her child near the cereal section. A cashier scanned items with practiced efficiency, and a teenager stacked bread on the shelves. Sarah shook her head, laughing at herself. She had always been a little too aware of her surroundings, maybe a habit she'd picked up from living with a police officer. Yet the feeling persisted. She tried to brush it aside, moving to the checkout. It was then, while unloading cans and cartons onto the belt, that she saw her. A small girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, peered out from behind a display of potato chips. Her eyes were enormous, deep brown pools that seemed to hold far more emotion than a child should carry. There was no mischievous grin, no childish curiosity. Instead, there was something heavier, something that made Sarah's chest tighten. Sarah offered a warm smile, hoping to reassure her. But as soon as their eyes met, the girl ducked out of sight, vanishing behind the stand. When Sarah craned her neck to look again, the space was empty. Later that day, Sarah drove to the community center. It was always her second home, a place where she organized donations, comforted struggling families, and coordinated volunteers. As she hauled bags of canned goods inside, a flicker of movement outside the glass doors caught her attention. Her eyes darted to the corner of the building, and there she was again, the same little girl. Standing, half-hidden, watching, Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. She called out softly, "And hello there. Are you lost?" The girl's eyes widened, and for a second it looked as though she might answer. But in a blink, she spun and darted out of sight again. Throughout the afternoon, Sarah tried to distract herself with sorting supplies, but her mind kept returning to the child's eyes. There had been a plea in them, a kind of silent scream for help, and though Sarah didn't understand it yet, something deep inside her whispered that this encounter was no coincidence. As the sun began to set, Sarah decided to take the long way home, passing through Oakwood Park. The golden light of late afternoon filtered through tall trees, scattering shadows across the winding paths. Children laughed on the swings, couples strolled hand in hand, and the world seemed for a moment calm and untouched by worry. But then she saw her again. sitting alone on a bench, legs swinging, eyes fixed directly on Sarah. This time Sarah refused to let her slip away. She walked toward the girl slowly, her steps careful and deliberate. "Hi there," she said in a gentle tone, her voice carrying the warmth she used with frightened animals at the shelter. "I've seen you around today. Is everything okay?" The child stared at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Her lips parted slightly as if she might speak, but no sound came. "My name's Sarah, what's yours?" The girl's small chest rose and fell quickly, her tiny hand gripping the edge of the bench. For a moment, it looked like she was gathering courage to answer. But then, as though a switch had been flipped, she slid off the bench, turned, and ran into the trees, her small figure swallowed by the shadows. Sarah's heart pounded. She called out, "Wait, please don't go." But the only reply was the rustle of leaves and the fading sound of footsteps. By the time Sarah got home, the sky was painted with deep purples and oranges. Daniel was already there, reheating leftovers in the microwave. His warm smile greeted her, but it quickly faded when he saw the worry etched into her face. "What happened?" he asked, pulling her into a chair. Sarah hesitated, unsure how to explain it without sounding foolish. "There's this little girl, Daniel. I saw her at the grocery store at the center, and then again in the park. She keeps watching me. She never says a word, just stares. And when I try to talk to her, she runs." Daniel leaned back, his police instincts already stirring. "What does she look like?" 7, maybe 8 years old, small, big brown eyes. "Clean clothes, but something about her. Daniel, she looked at me like she wanted to tell me something, but couldn't." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Could be new in the neighborhood. Maybe just shy. Kids do that sometimes." Sarah shook her head. No, this was different. There was desperation in her eyes. Daniel reached across the table, squeezed her hand. "Okay, I'll keep an eye out while I'm on patrol. If she's in trouble, we'll figure it out. For now, try not to worry too much." But worry was exactly what Sarah did. That night, as she lay beside her sleeping husband, she replayed every moment. The way the girl had hidden, the way she had nearly spoken, the silent pleading in her gaze. It was as though the child was carrying a secret too heavy for her small frame. At 2:37 a.m., Sarah slipped out of bed, unable to rest. She made her way downstairs, put the kettle on, and stared out into the quiet street. The glow of the lamppost lit up the sidewalk, and for a split second, Sarah thought she saw a small shadow move across it. She blinked, and it was gone. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering to herself, "Get a grip, Sarah, you're imagining things." But in her heart, she knew she wasn't. Somewhere out there in the night, those wide, sorrowful brown eyes were still watching. And deep down, Sarah Matthews understood something she couldn't yet explain. This was only the beginning. Shadows in the neighborhood, the following morning dawned clear. The kind of morning where sunlight fell like a blessing across Oakwood's quiet streets, turning the dew on the lawns into a field of diamonds. Sarah Matthews, however, felt no such brightness inside. She had slept only in fragments, tossing and turning, her mind caught in loops of thought about the little girl she had seen again and again the day before. The girl's eyes, those dark and sorrowful pools, haunted her like an unfinished sentence that demanded to be completed. She moved through the house on autopilot, fixing breakfast, feeding the dog, straightening the cushions on the couch, but every action was distracted, her gaze drifting often to the window as though she might see that small figure once again, watching silently from the corner of the street. Daniel, ever perceptive, noticed the way Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she poured her coffee, how her mind seemed distant even as he tried to speak to her about his shift ahead. He reached across the table, his large hand covering hers, grounding her with his calm presence. "Still thinking about the girl?" he asked softly, though he already knew the answer. Sarah nodded, eyes unfocused. "I can't help it, Daniel. It feels like she's everywhere I go, and it doesn't feel random anymore. It's like she's choosing to follow me, like she wants me to notice her, like she needs me to." Daniel studied her carefully, his years in law enforcement teaching him to weigh every detail, to look for the deeper currents beneath words. "All right," he said after a pause, his tone resolute. "Then I'll make this a priority. I'll start asking around today, talk to the neighbors, maybe check in with the schools. Someone has to know who she is." Sarah felt a flicker of relief, though it did little to silence the gnawing worry in her chest. She forced a small smile, trying to mask the depth of her unease. "Thank you, I can't shake the feeling something's wrong." That day, Sarah tried to busy herself with work at the animal shelter. The familiar smell of hay, the soft sounds of dogs barking and cats meowing usually brought her comfort. She threw herself into the tasks, feeding the animals, scrubbing kennels, answering calls. But even here, the child's presence seemed to linger in the corners of her mind. And then, as she bent to pick up a spilled bag of kibble, she saw movement through the large front window. Her breath caught. Across the street, half concealed by a tree trunk, stood the little girl. She wasn't hiding completely this time. She was simply standing there watching Sarah with those same enormous, unblinking eyes. There was no malice in them, no mischief. Only longing, and a kind of fragile desperation that made Sarah's throat tighten. For a long moment, the two simply looked at one another through the glass, a silent connection spanning the distance. Sarah felt her heart beating hard against her ribs. She wanted to rush outside, to finally cross that distance and speak. But just as she moved toward the door, a car drove past, breaking the moment. When Sarah stepped outside, the girl was gone. Linda, her fellow volunteer, noticed the way Sarah lingered outside, scanning the street. "Still no luck with your mystery shadow?" she asked, her voice a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Sarah sighed, shaking her head. "She was right there, Linda, right there. She just keeps vanishing. And it's not my imagination. I know what I saw." Linda placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're not crazy, Sarah. I've known you too long. Your instincts are good. If this girl keeps appearing like this, then she's trying to tell you something in her own way. Don't give up. Keep paying attention." Those words carried Sarah through the rest of the day, though the weight of worry never truly lifted. Meanwhile, Daniel set about his quiet investigation. He started at Oakwood Elementary, showing a rough sketch he had drawn based on Sarah's descriptions. The principal frowned, studied it carefully, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, Officer Matthews. She doesn't look like any of our students, and we haven't had any new enrollments recently that match that age or description." Daniel moved on to the middle school, to the daycare centers, to shopkeepers who had lived in town for decades. Everywhere he went, the answer was the same. No one recognized the child. No one had seen her before. It was as though she had materialized from thin air, her existence acknowledged only by Sarah. By late afternoon, Daniel sat in his patrol car, his mind heavy with unease. He had dealt with lost children before, runaways, kids from troubled homes who wandered until someone kind took them in. But this case was different. Here was a girl who appeared in public again and again, watching the same woman. Yet no one seemed to know her name, her family, or even her origin. That evening, Sarah was walking back from the grocery store, arms heavy with bags, when she felt it again, the quiet patter of footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, and for the first time she saw the girl so clearly it nearly stole her breath. The child had stepped out from behind a parked car only a few feet away. Her small frame looked even more fragile up close, the oversized dress she wore hanging awkwardly on her thin shoulders. But it was her eyes, those wide, tear-glossed eyes that pinned Sarah in place. Sarah dropped her bags to the sidewalk, cans rolling onto the pavement. She took a careful step forward, her voice breaking slightly as she spoke. "It's okay, sweetheart. You don't have to be afraid. My name is Sarah. I just want to help you. Please talk to me." The girl's lips parted, and in the faintest whisper, Sarah heard her own name. Just one word, Sarah. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. "Yes, that's me," she said quickly, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. "That's right. I'm Sarah. What's your name?" But before the girl could answer, a car engine roared nearby, startling her. Her eyes widened in panic, and she bolted, her small feet carrying her away faster than Sarah could follow. In seconds, she was gone again, swallowed by the maze of alleys. When Sarah stumbled home, breathless and shaken, she found Daniel waiting, his brow furrowed with concern. She poured out the story, describing every detail, how the girl had whispered her name and then fled. Daniel's face grew grave. "This isn't just chance anymore. She knows you. She's seeking you out. And if she's whispering your name, it means there's a connection here we don't understand yet." Sarah pressed her hands to her face, her voice breaking. "Daniel, she looked at me like she was begging me to save her. What if she's in danger? What if she doesn't have anyone else?" Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Then we'll find her. We'll figure out who she is and why she's coming to you. But until we know you're not alone in this, I'm with you, always. As twilight fell and the house settled into silence, Sarah stood at the window once again, staring into the darkening street. Somewhere out there she knew the little girl was watching, and with every hour that passed, the mystery deepened, pulling Sarah further into a story she had not chosen but could not escape. This was no longer just a child's strange curiosity. This was a cry for help, and Sarah Matthews could feel in her bones that if she didn't uncover the truth soon, it might be too late. The truth revealed, the days that followed were filled with a strange tension that Sarah Matthews could not shake. It was as though the air itself had grown heavier, as though every corner of her world now carried the weight of that child's gaze. She went about her normal routines, volunteering at the shelter, shopping for groceries, attending the food drive. But beneath the surface of ordinary life, there was always the silent presence of the little girl. Sometimes Sarah glimpsed her from across the street, standing by a lamppost. Sometimes she appeared at the park, her small form framed against the swings. Other times Sarah could swear she caught sight of her reflection in a shop window, though when she turned, the sidewalk was empty. Wherever Sarah went, the girl followed, and though she said little, the weight of her silence spoke louder than any words could. Daniel had kept his promise and made the girl part of his official concern. He had filed a report, spoken to his captain, and spread quiet word among his fellow officers to be on the lookout. But despite their efforts, she remained a mystery. No missing child alerts matched her description. No families came forward. No schools reported an absent student. It was as if the girl did not exist on paper, as though the world itself had forgotten her. For a seasoned officer like Daniel, this absence was chilling. Children always had connections, records, relatives, guardians, but this girl was a ghost in every system. One afternoon, Sarah returned home earlier than usual, her heart heavy with unease. As she stepped inside, she noticed a folded piece of paper slipped under her front door. Frowning, she bent to pick it up, her pulse quickening. The paper was wrinkled and smudged, the handwriting uneven and shaky, as if scrawled by a child not yet steady with a pencil. 4 words were written, each one pressing into the page with desperate force. "Please don't leave me." Sarah's knees weakened as she sank onto the couch, clutching the note as though it were a lifeline. Her throat tightened, tears welling in her eyes. The girl had reached out. She was not just a shadow now, she was pleading for help. When Daniel came home and Sarah showed him the note, his face grew hard, his jaw tight with determination. "This changes everything," he said firmly. "She's asking for help directly. That means whatever she's running from, it's serious." That night, Sarah found herself restless again, staring out the window into the silent street. And then just past the glow of the street lamp, she saw her. The little girl stood at the edge of the sidewalk, her small hands clutching the hem of her oversized dress, her eyes wide and wet with unshed tears. This time, Sarah did not hesitate. She stepped outside, the night air cool against her skin, and slowly walked toward the girl, her voice calm and soothing. "It's okay, sweetheart. You don't have to run. I'm here. You gave me your note, remember? You don't have to be afraid." The girl's chest rose and fell quickly, and for a moment Sarah thought she would flee again. But instead she stayed rooted to the spot, trembling. When Sarah reached her, she knelt down, meeting those wide, sorrowful eyes at their level. "I just want to help you," Sarah whispered. "Please let me help you." At last the girl's lips moved, and in a trembling voice barely louder than a breath she spoke. "My name is Amara." Sarah's heart squeezed tightly at the sound. It was the first time the girl had said anything beyond her name. "Amara," Sarah repeated gently, as if saying it might anchor her to this world. "That's a beautiful name. Thank you for telling me." Amara's small hands twisted in the fabric of her dress. Her voice shook as she added, "They said not to tell anyone, but I didn't know what else to do. You're the only one who sees me, the only one who stops." Sarah's brows furrowed, confusion and fear mixing in her chest. "Who said that, Amara? Who told you not to tell?" But before the child could answer, a sudden noise, a car pulling out from a nearby driveway, made her flinch violently. Her eyes widened with terror, and without another word she bolted, disappearing once again into the dark. Sarah remained kneeling on the sidewalk, her heart hammering, the child's name echoing in her mind like a haunting melody. Amara. At last, The mystery girl had a name, and with it came an even deeper question. Who was she hiding from? When Sarah told Daniel everything later that night, his face grew more serious than she had ever seen it. He had spent his career reading between the lines of human behavior, and what Sarah described set every alarm bell ringing in his instincts. She's scared of someone, he said, his tone grim. And if she's been told not to talk, it means she's being controlled. Maybe by someone dangerous. Maybe by someone who doesn't want her found. Sarah shivered at the thought, her hand clutching Daniel's as though to draw strength. But she came to me. She gave me her name. That has to mean she wants out. She wants someone to save her. Daniel nodded firmly. Then we'll save her. But we can't do this alone anymore. I'll call for backup tomorrow. We'll open a full investigation. If this girl is being hidden or hurt, we're going to find out. For the first time since this began, Sarah felt a flicker of real hope. But it was hope tinged with fear because she knew now without question. Amara's story was not just about a lost child. It was about something far darker, something that had kept her silent for far too long. And as Sarah lay awake that night, listening to the steady breathing of her husband beside her, she realized that their lives had already changed. They were no longer bystanders. They were part of Amara's story now, bound to her by a fragile trust and a desperate plea for safety. The truth had begun to reveal itself, but Sarah knew this was only the beginning. Amara's eyes had told her there was more, so much more, hidden beneath the silence. And when the rest of that truth surfaced, it would shake not only their world, but the entire community around them. Race against time. The following morning, Oakwood seemed like the same quiet town it had always been. Children waited at bus stops with backpacks hanging from their shoulders. Neighbors watered their lawns and shopkeepers opened their stores with the creak of old shutters. But for Sarah and Daniel Matthews, nothing about the day felt ordinary anymore. Their world had shifted in ways invisible to others, because somewhere in the shadows of this peaceful town lurked a truth connected to a frightened little girl who had whispered her name like a secret too heavy to carry. Amara, just knowing her name, had made everything more real, more urgent, and far more dangerous. Daniel woke before dawn, his face already set with determination as he pulled on his uniform. He kissed Sarah's forehead, but even in that brief gesture she felt the weight of his thoughts. He wasn't just leaving for another patrol shift. He was leaving to fight for a child's life. She watched him lace his boots with the precise focus of a man preparing for more than routine duty. And she knew that once he stepped out of their door, this would no longer be just between them. At the station, Daniel wasted no time. He called his captain into a private office, laying out everything they knew, Sarah's repeated encounters, the girl's silence, the note slipped under their door, and finally, the moment when she revealed her name. As he spoke, his captain's expression grew grave. Oakwood was a small town, one where everyone knew everyone else, and the idea of a child existing outside of the town's watchful eyes was deeply unsettling. "All right," the captain said at last, his voice heavy. "We'll put resources on this. Discreetly at first. If someone's hiding her, they may not want the attention. And if she's in danger, we'll need to move carefully." Daniel left the office with the promise of backup. Patrol officers alerted, schools checked again, social services contacted quietly. It wasn't much yet, but it was a start. For the first time, the search for Amara was no longer confined to whispered conversations in his living room. The system was moving, slow but steady, in her favor. Back at home, Sarah spent the morning pacing the kitchen, unable to sit still. Every creak of the house made her glance toward the door. Every rustle outside drew her to the window. She couldn't shake the image of Amara's eyes the night before, the fear, the trembling voice that admitted she had been told not to speak. Sarah's heart ached with a motherly instinct she had never known she possessed so strongly. It wasn't just sympathy anymore. It was a bond, fragile but unbreakable. She wanted to protect Amara the way she would protect her own. By midday, Sarah went to the community center, hoping work might distract her. Yet even there, she felt the familiar weight of being watched. As she carried boxes of donated clothes into the sorting room, she caught a glimpse through the window. Amara again, standing across the street, half hidden but no longer running at the first sight of Sarah. This time, Sarah acted quickly. She dropped the box and hurried outside, her heart pounding. The girl didn't flee. She only backed away a step, her eyes darting nervously. Sarah raised her hands in a gesture of peace. "It's all right, Amara," she said softly, her voice carrying across the quiet street. I know your name now. I know you're afraid, but you don't have to be afraid of me. You can trust me." Amara hesitated, her small hands gripping the fabric of her dress tightly. Her lips trembled as though words hovered on the edge, but they wouldn't come. Sarah took another careful step forward, lowering her voice as if speaking to a frightened bird. "I promise you I'll listen. Whatever it is you want to say, I'll believe you." For the briefest moment it seemed Amara might stay. She even reached out her hand slightly, as though testing the possibility of connection. But then a sound from a nearby alley, a door slamming, voices raised, made her flinch in terror. With a strangled cry, she turned and bolted once more, vanishing down the narrow street before Sarah could follow. Sarah stood frozen, her chest aching with frustration. She had been so close, closer than ever before, yet something or someone was keeping Amara trapped in silence. That evening, Sarah told Daniel everything, her voice trembling with equal parts hope and despair. He listened intently, every detail etched into his memory. When she finished, his expression hardened. "She's terrified of someone, Sarah. Whoever it is, they're controlling her with fear. That's why she can't speak freely. That's why she runs at the first noise. This isn't just a lost child. This is abuse or worse." Sarah's hands gripped his tightly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Then we can't waste any more time. If she's in danger, if someone is hurting her, we have to find her before it's too late." Daniel nodded. "I've already asked for backup. Tomorrow we expand the search. We'll check abandoned houses, rental properties, places where someone could hide a child without drawing attention. And Sarah," he paused, his voice lowering with gravity, "I need you to be careful. If whoever has control of her realizes you're the one she's reaching out to, they may see you as a threat." Sarah swallowed hard, fear rippling through her. But she met his gaze with steady determination. "I don't care. She's just a little girl. If she needs me, I won't turn away." That night was the longest yet. Sarah sat by the window until the early hours, scanning the street for any sign of Amara. She felt the weight of invisible eyes, and once or twice, she thought she saw movement near the trees, but Amara never appeared. The next morning, Daniel and a team of officers quietly canvassed the town, checking alleyways, questioning residents, and reviewing security cameras from shops near where Sarah had seen the girl. Bits of information trickled in, reports of a small figure seen late at night, glimpses of a child darting between shadows, but never clear enough to trace. Still, the threads began to form a picture. Amara was not a figment of imagination. She was real. She was here, and she was moving through Oakwood like a ghost only Sarah could see clearly. By late afternoon, Daniel returned home with news that made Sarah's heart pound. One of his colleagues had found something unusual, a storage shed on the edge of town that showed signs of someone staying there. A blanket folded neatly, empty food wrappers, a child's shoe. No one had rented the property officially, and neighbors claimed not to have seen anyone come or go. It was a hiding place, one that spoke of secrecy and desperation. "Do you think she's staying there?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with both fear and hope. Daniel hesitated. "It's possible. But if she is, then someone is supplying her with food. And that means she's not alone. Someone is involved, Sarah. Someone who doesn't want her found." The realization sent a chill through the room. They were no longer dealing with a frightened child on her own. They were up against an unseen hand controlling her movements, perhaps watching just as closely as Sarah had felt all along. That night, as storm clouds rolled over Oakwood, the weight of urgency pressed down on them both. Time was no longer on their side. Somewhere out there, a little girl with pleading eyes waited for rescue, trapped by fear and silence. And now that she had revealed her name, now that she had reached out, Sarah knew the danger around her would only grow sharper. Daniel checked his equipment methodically, his badge gleaming under the lamplight, his expression carved from stone. "Tomorrow," he said firmly, "we go in with everything we have. We're not just looking anymore, we're finding her. No matter what it takes." Sarah sat in silence, clutching the note Amara had left. "Please don't leave me." She traced the shaky letters with her fingertip, a vow forming deep within her. She would not leave Amara. She would not give up until the girl was safe. But as the thunder rumbled in the distance and shadows lengthened across their home, Sarah felt the truth pressing in. They were racing against an enemy they had yet to see, and the clock was ticking. If they failed to uncover the full story soon, Amara's whispered name might be the last word she ever spoke. Rescue, healing, and new family. The storm that swept across Oakwood that night seemed almost prophetic, as though nature itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. Rain lashed against the windows of the Matthews home, lightning split the sky, and thunder rolled like a warning drumbeat in the distance. Sarah barely slept, her fingers clenched tightly around the crumpled note Amara had left behind. Those desperate words, "Please don't leave me," etched into her mind as both plea and promise. She sat by the window for hours, eyes scanning the rain-drenched street, searching for the small shadow she had grown so accustomed to. But Amara did not come. Not that night. The silence was heavier than ever, and Sarah's heart told her it was because the girl was running out of time. At dawn, Daniel left the house with a gravity that Sarah had rarely seen in him. His uniform was immaculate, his jaw set, and his voice steady as he kissed her forehead. "Stay inside today. Don't go wandering alone. I'll call as soon as we have something." Though his words were meant to reassure, Sarah could feel the storm that raged inside him too. He wasn't simply heading to work. He was heading into a battle against time, secrecy, and the unknown. The police team began their search with renewed determination, fanning out across Oakwood in quiet sweeps. The storage shed at the edge of town was inspected again, this time more thoroughly, and new details emerged. Beneath the blanket was a worn stuffed toy, a small bear missing an ear, soaked from the storm but clearly treasured. In the corner, someone had scrawled uneven letters on the wall with chalk. Amara. It was confirmation beyond doubt that the girl had been there, but it also raised darker questions. If this was her hiding place, who had been keeping her hidden? Who had supplied her with food? And why had she been left to live in such secrecy and fear? As the officers pressed deeper into the investigation, Daniel's instincts led him to an abandoned duplex near the old railway tracks, a place long neglected and avoided by the community. The windows were boarded, weeds grew wild around the yard, and the whole building seemed to sag under the weight of years. Yet when Daniel and his partner approached, they noticed signs that betrayed recent use: footprints in the mud, a freshly broken lock, and the faint glow of light leaking through a crack in the boards. Inside, the air was damp and musty, carrying the scent of mold and dust. But layered beneath it was something else, the unmistakable scent of food recently cooked. They moved carefully through the narrow hallways, flashlights slicing through the gloom, and then from a room at the back they heard it, the faint sound of muffled crying. Daniel's heart surged. He pushed open the door, and there she was, Amara. Huddled in the corner, her tiny frame shaking, her arms wrapped protectively around her knees. Her wide brown eyes lifted toward the sudden light, filled with the same desperate fear Sarah had described again and again. She looked so small, so breakable, that for a moment Daniel's throat closed with emotion. He lowered his flashlight, raising his hands gently. "Amara," he said softly, using her name as an anchor. "It's okay. You're safe now. I'm here to help you." But before he could take another step, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway. A figure emerged, a gaunt man with sunken eyes, clothes hanging loosely on his frame, his expression twisted with anger at the intrusion. His presence made everything clear. Amara had not been hiding by choice. She had been kept here, under the control of someone who had silenced her with threats and fear. The man's voice was harsh, his words slurred with rage. "She's mine. You can't take her." He lunged forward, but years of training steadied Daniel's hand and heart. With swift precision, the officers subdued the man, their voices firm and commanding, leaving no room for argument. The struggle was brief, and soon the man was restrained, his shouts fading into bitter silence. Daniel turned back to the corner where Amara still trembled, her eyes darting in terror. Slowly he knelt down, his voice calm and reassuring. "It's over now, Amara. He can't hurt you anymore. You're safe." For a moment she remained frozen, as though unable to believe it. But then, with a sob that broke Daniel's heart, she crawled forward and flung herself into his arms. Her tiny body shook against him. But in that moment, Daniel knew the fight had been worth every second. He cradled her carefully, whispering words of comfort as though she were his own child. Hours later, when Sarah opened the front door of their home, she gasped at the sight before her. Daniel stood in the doorway, drenched from the storm, his arms wrapped around a small figure clinging tightly to him. Amara. Her hair was tangled, her dress soaked, but her eyes, though still filled with fear, were fixed firmly on Sarah. "Sarah," Daniel said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "We found her." Sarah's heart swelled as tears streamed down her cheeks. She stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached out. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're safe now. You're home." Amara hesitated only a moment before reaching toward Sarah, her small arms wrapping tightly around her waist. In that embrace, Sarah felt something shift deep within her soul. This was no longer just about rescuing a lost child. This was about building a new beginning. The days that followed were filled with both challenges and hope. Amara was placed under protective care while the investigation into her abductor unfolded. But she spent her nights at the Matthews home, where Sarah and Daniel offered her the stability she had been denied for so long. At first she barely spoke, her silence still wrapped around her like armor. But slowly, with gentle patience, Sarah coaxed her into laughter, into stories, into trust. Daniel too became her anchor, reading to her at night, walking her to the park in daylight where she no longer hid in the shadows, but played freely on the swings. The town of Oakwood rallied around them, shocked by the story but inspired by the Matthews' determination. Donations poured in for Amara's care, and neighbors who had once been strangers opened their hearts to her. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer forgotten. In time, the question arose of what would happen to her permanently. And when officials asked, Sarah and Daniel did not hesitate. They began the process to foster and eventually adopt her. For them, it wasn't a choice. It was a calling. They had been chosen by circumstance, but their love had made it destiny. Months later, on a bright spring morning, Sarah watched from the porch as Amara ran across the yard, her laughter ringing clear in the air. She was no longer the silent shadow lurking at the edges of life. She was a child again, joyful, free, and loved. Sarah felt Daniel's arm slip around her shoulders, and when she looked up at him, his smile mirrored her own. They had begun this journey with confusion, with fear, with sleepless nights and unanswered questions, but they had ended it with something far greater, a new family, bound not by blood but by courage, compassion, and the refusal to turn away from a child in need. Amara's story had once been one of shadows and silence. Now it was one of healing, hope, and a future brighter than she had ever dreamed. And as Sarah held her close that evening, whispering a promise that she would never again be left alone, she knew without doubt that the little girl who had once followed her silently had, in truth, been leading her all along, to a life forever changed by love.